Welcome to Methods Unsound presents Moving On, a 5-part mini-series on the films we loved that now make us cringe. My name is Christopher Ratcliff, one of the founders and writers of Methods Unsound, a semi-dormant pop culture website that we've decided to resurrect for this period of extended quarantine. Joining me via a mess of online platforms, laptops, microphones and internet connections of various quality are 4 other members of the Methods Unsound team. Firstly, we have Katherine Thompson. Hi, Katherine.
Hi, was I supposed to prepare a bit because I did not prepare it? But
No, you
I'm
just
Katherine,
have to say
and
hi.
I used to write for Methods Unsound. Hi.
Yeah, okay, cool.
I'm Katherine.
Katherine, what's the best thing you've watched in the last 3 weeks of quarantine?
Ooh, good question. I recently watched a Channel 4 comedy called Feel Good. It was like a 6-part comedy with a Canadian comedian, and it really made me laugh, and I recommend it.
So is it a British thing or a Canadian thing?
It's British. It's set in Britain. I should look this up. Set in Britain, but written by May something. He's a Canadian comedian, and also has Lisa Kudrow, who's fast becoming my favourite comedian parent in films, off the back of Booksmart and this comedy. And it's just kind of about a lesbian comedian trying to like get on with life, ex-addict. It really made me laugh. So.
I believe Canadian comedians prefer to be called Canadians. Good. Ted! Hi. What's the best thing you've watched in your quarantine period?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everybody. So my favourite thing I've been watching in quarantine is Devs, which is the new Alex Garland series that's on Hulu, produced by FX. And it's got Nick Offerman in it, and it's kind of that weird Alex Garland esoteric sci-fi stuff where he's dealing with some massive themes in this this kind of like Facebook-esque tech company, but it's dealing with the do we have free will? Is everything predetermined? But it's all wrapped up in this kind of murder mystery layer as well. It's well worth watching, and it looks sexy as hell.
All right, and then also we have Joachim Farnham. Hi, Joe.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm all right, thank you.
So,
you're the first person to ask me that. That's nice. What's the best thing you've watched in the last during your quarantine time?
Well, I've been a bit spoiled for choice. I went out and bought all of the streaming services I could possibly get my hand on, and now I'm like paralysed with choice. So I've been watching Bob's Burgers a lot, and I've just watched the best episode ever, which is the Equestronauts one.
Joe, have you been watching the menu screens for all of the various streaming services you have? Because that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. Just comparing menu screens, yeah.
Well, comparing and just paralysed was absolute ultimate choice. Too much choice.
I had half an hour allotted TV time the other evening, and I just spent it going, oh, what's on Disney Plus? And I found Air Bud, and then I went to bed.
I was about to say this is a completely non-sponsored thing, but what's great for not scrolling through hours and hours and hours of menu screens is Mubi. I don't know if anyone has that. It's kind of like a curated streaming service, so they just drop, I think, what's like 8 to 10 films, and you don't have that much choice. It's you're watching what's on there or you're not. So yeah.
Well, don't you have like the 1970s? Don't they just have don't they have like 30 films that you then they drop one off every day and then add one every day? Is that not right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But it's great for not just spending hours looking for something to watch. Yeah, all a bit arty though.
Teddy, what if part of what I enjoy is scrolling, trying to decide what to watch?
Well, I can't help you with that, Katherine.
You'll find the all-scrolling channel on Roku.
Sounds like my perfect channel.
What I'm really enjoying about this is how every joke I've made has landed with, I'm going to say, an eon of silence.
It takes me at least 2 minutes to unmute my mic to be able to respond to anything. So
It's fine.
I've already finished laughing by the time I've unmuted my mic.
Shall we introduce Matt Owen? Finally, who's already been talking all the way through. That's one of the bits of housekeeping that we should have said. You're not allowed to talk until you've actually been introduced. But fuck it. Matt, tell us what you've been pouring into your eyeballs. I got Disney Plus as well. The menu screen is the best bit. I like all the stuff about may contain outdated cultural references and things
those are
in
good,
those
aren't they?
ancient Disney Kurt Russell films. You know.
Yeah.
I watched the Odessa File. Have you ever seen that with John Voight? Not on Disney Plus. There aren't
I was gonna
surprising
say,
lack
it's
of.
it's got John Voight, Michael Caine, and Goofy in it.
That's right. Yeah, and John Voight travels on a magical bed that he twists the bed knob on and hunts the Nazis or something. I think that's what it's about anyway. So
You really made us wait for the word knob then.
Yeah,
I know.
Also, I watched Green Lantern with Ryan Reynolds, and I demand a full reappraisal of that movie. It was quite good. It was quite good. It was on. I don't know. Well, anyway, it was on the menu. It was presented to me by a streaming service, and I was like, "Yeah, I should watch that. Let's see if it's terrible or not." And no, actually, it's kind of great. It's kind of like, some of the CGI needs a bit of a touch up, but it's a pretty good movie. He's Ryan Reynolds is quite good in it. I mean, not as good as like Van Wilder, or it's not those sort of Oscar-worthy levels, but well, I mean, it's definitely
Are you trying to slowly introduce us to your pick for your?
No, I'm not. Nothing to do with it. But
before they knew it, 60 minutes in, the entire podcast had suddenly become about the Green Lantern.
Just about Green Lantern. It was good. Honestly, go and watch it again. It's like scary villains, decent characters, Blake Lively, all sorts of stuff going on in there.
What more could you actually want from a film?
In the interest of moving on, let's move on to the matter at hand. Please God, move on.
Right. Okay. So, in this mini podcast series, the team will take it in turns to pick a film they used to love for a brief period of time, but they now feel they've grown out of. The other hosts will then pick an element of the film they too find embarrassing or risible and interrogate the host about it, destroying their character and possibly the very reputation of the film itself, apart from Matt, who is clearly embarrassed by nothing. Then, at the end, we all have to pick one thing each we like about the film, and we'll rate the film out of 10, and definitively conclude whether it should be cast away forever into the same landfill containing Guy Ritchie's Cast Away, or rescued from insignificance and placed alongside Nicholas Roeg's Insignificance. That was a long walk to get there, and I'm sorry. This week, it's my honour to pick the film we discuss. And that film is, I'm sorry to say, Kevin Smith's second film, the 1995 comedy Mallrats.
Dude, this looks like your mom.
Bye-bye, Easter Bunny.
There is no Easter Bunny!
You know about this game show thing they got going on here? Well, we need you guys to somehow ensure that it doesn't happen.
Fly, badass, fly! Good evening, and welcome to Truth or Date.
Second suitor, would you ever make whoopee in public?
No, I think that's kind of personal. I don't think I should answer that.
Mallrats.
You said it was a good size.
When a girl says it's a good size, it's a nice way of saying that it's small.
What else did you expect from the director of Clerks?
Hey!
Clerks came out in 1994. I was 14 and I adored it. I was obsessed by it, maybe. And I found it really inspiring. I don't think I would have attempted to make my own no-budget, dick joke heavy film when I was in college, along with one or two other people on this call, without having watched Clerks first. I would even go so far to say it's an important movie too. In 2019, Clerks, or Clarks if you're a fan of pronouncing stuff wrong, was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry as it's deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, which is impressive for a film where the cast can barely act, the camera work is just about competent, and it contains the line ass-worshipping rim jobbers. Sadly, this isn't about Clerks. This is about Mallrats, which followed a year later in 1995.
to put that into context, I would have been 15 in my final year of school, and clearly hungry for more Kevin Smith brand of explicit humour and really obvious nerdy references. I think at the time I knew that Mallrats bombed at the US box office, and the critics set it on fire like the bag of shit it is. And I remember it being released straight to video, which even then I knew was a bad sign. I will admit that it wasn't that I didn't like it the first time I watched it, but I was definitely disappointed. And I don't think I watched it that much until I went to college, and all of my cool new friends who were into skateboarding and comics and had long hair and listened to the same bands that are on the Mallrats soundtrack, funnily enough, they loved Mallrats. They loved it, and we would watch it pretty often. And I think through college and hanging out with those guys and being 16, 17 or 18, it just developed into this cult thing, like Idle Hands or Go or other underdog slacker comedies that would shine so bright during your formative years that you would then never watch again after that initial period of shininess, until you've made to watch it again by a podcast 20 years later. Christ. So I watched it again a couple of nights ago, and it was really tough. It's awful. I also remembered that I probably watched Mallrats with Kevin Smith's audio commentary on more times than I watched the actual film, which I think even Kevin Smith would admit says more about his talents as a storyteller or a raconteur than an actual filmmaker. But yeah, it's just embarrassing. I knew I'd grown out of it by the time I hit my 20s, but I don't think I was quite prepared for how grueling it was to watch it as a 40-year-old. I've got a bunch of notes, but I don't want to take too much away from everyone else's attacks. I know Catherine's hungry to launch one. But I think the most damning things on rewatching are it's just not funny, like profoundly not funny. And it's odd because I went back and I double checked Clerks, and even if the humour is quite dated or too crass, there's a pretty solid joke structure to every joke. It works. But in Mallrats, it's just badly choreographed slapstick with just really offensive dialogue that doesn't have any wit or charm. It's just slut shaming or like jokes at the expense of lesbians, and it's all delivered by one awful man who can't act and another awful man who angrily screams every line of dialogue and leans in way too close to the other actors. And also, like, it's a comedy that talks about a girl dying alone in a swimming pool in the opening 2 minutes. Like, it's not the best basis of a rip roaring, hilarious film. Anyway, I've got other notes, but I'll let you guys take the floor. I'll just finish by saying this podcast is meant to be about films you've grown out of rather than bad films per se. And I'm truly embarrassed that I like this. And there's a large part of me that wishes that I hadn't picked it and gone for something a bit less retrograde, so you wouldn't think less of me. But then, in a way, this is the perfect movie for this topic because it sums up how awful 15-year-old boys are. And I'm thankful to be embarrassed by that.
I'll jump in here.
What a surprise. Katherine, you have the floor.
I think I'll start with the fact that I certainly wasn't 15 when this film came out. When did you say? 1995?
1995, yeah.
Yeah, that makes me 8. So I certainly wasn't into it at the time. And I can't really recently remember watching any Kevin Smith films. My introduction to Kevin Smith was my brother, who is a more similar age to you, Christopher, and loves Kevin Smith. And I do sometimes listen to his podcast, Fat Man on Batman. And it's interesting to hear that now and look back at Mallrats, where he still makes like continuous dick jokes. Like he must be in his 40s, 50s, and it's like every third sentence is a dick joke. But it's kind of, you let it go because I don't think he's a dick. He's like quite a, quite an interesting guy to listen to. He's got a lot of knowledge, got a lot of love. He's really soppy, which I quite enjoy. I don't know if anyone's seen him crying along to episodes of The Flash. It's quite endearing. But I just hated this movie so much. I really struggled to find any. I'm sorry. I was like, me and Christopher generally share similar tastes, but I just couldn't find a single redeeming feature about it. We all know that I accidentally watched the director's cut, which is 35 minutes longer than the original, which was a special level of cruel.
Yeah, can you explain? Because I only watched the original cut, but like, what happens at the beginning of the director's cut? Because I saw some messages back and forth, and I was like, this sounds weird. Like,
I feel like we need to put this into context. So there is a director's cut that was released like 10 years after, which is on some like anniversary DVD, and it's 35 minutes longer than the original version, and none of us had any.
That region.
Yeah, none of us had any idea this existed, and we shared. One of us shared around a copy of the film for us all to watch for this podcast, and Katherine was clearly the first person to watch it. And I'll let you tell the rest of the story, Katherine.
Yeah, I mean, not only that, is I don't think I've ever actually watched Mallrats before, so I was probably the worst placed person to watch this version because it didn't occur to me that it wasn't the correct version. But honestly, and obviously it means also that I can't tell you the specific differences, although we did have a look on the Wikipedia page. But the intro to the film is so long, and nothing of interest happens. There's like Michael Rooker like fawning over the legs of some politician in a really creepy and unnecessary way, and part of the plot is the main guy gets a loaded musket caught in the hair of his girlfriend, and then they think he's trying to shoot a politician. Is that familiar to anyone else who watched the
because none of us watched it.
And that lasts like 15 minutes.
But this is the reason why her dad hates TS so much, right? Because in this deleted scene, TS tries to shoot the governor of New Jersey or whoever it's.
That's right. While he's trying to sell her on his TV show, which also
essentially
doesn't make any sense.
It creates a giant plot hole at the beginning of the film because they just cut it and they don't. They don't replace it, but it is mentioned 2 or 3 times later and forms the basis of some like character motivation. So just by losing it, and thank God they did lose it because it's, by all accounts, Katherine, it's terrible and pointless.
The funny thing about it was I ended up watching it in a series of stints, about 20 minutes each, because I had to go out for my afternoon constitutional with my wife because we were in lockdown and scheduled. So I watched basically that intro up to and about the point where he gets dumped or whatever. And the rest of the film is really offensive. But the worst thing about that beginning bit is it's so fucking boring. It's so dull. I've never been less interested in a film in my entire life, and I really had to push myself to turn it back on again after that.
I mean, it sounds like it's got everything, like someone trying to assassinate a governor and, like a political scandal, it sounds a bit like. I mean, like, why? It sounds better than Mallrats.
No, inexplicably, it's so fucking boring. It made me want to cry.
So to put it into context, that means that in the original cut of Mallrats, it takes them 30 minutes to get to the fucking mall. I can only apologise. Yeah, but Katherine raises a good point. Like, she found it irredeemable. Did anyone else find it vaguely redeemable?
I was thinking, I don't know. I mean, I've got a few thoughts about this movie as well, having re-seen it. It was funny that you were saying earlier that your introduction to it was at college, and you had friends who were into that kind of stuff, right? And I was thinking about you've got like Brody, his character, Jason Lee in here, and he's kind of like he's comic book reading, and he makes all these references to that kind of stuff, right? Which I was probably into as well at the same time. But I mean, in order to get that, I think like part of its cult appeal was the fact that in 1995, hardly anyone knew what a Wolverine's berserker rage was, right? So do you think that you've grown out of it because the elitism of it has gone now, and everyone knows who Wolverine is now, and that do you
No,
think
I
that's
don't.
what's changed, and that's why you've grown out of it? Or?
So that's interesting. I've grown out of it because I find it absolutely abhorrent in its outlook.
I mean, it literally,
and I don't.
oh god, so many rape jokes.
To speak to the comic book thing, that is interesting because it is like 12 years before Iron Man is released, and so actually, how many people would recognize Stan Lee? So when Jason Lee bumps into Stan Lee, who he's obsessed by, and doesn't recognize him,
He doesn't
it
even
feels
recognise him.
absolute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like it feels unbelievable. But yeah, you're right. In the context of now, that feels unbelievable to us. But actually, at the time, would that be true? And yeah, you're right. Actually, maybe not many people would know who Wolverine is and know that was his berserker rage. So that is a good point. But also, I think that's so minor.
I feel like it's like that's the character of Brody. That's why people maybe rented it and why it became a cult.
But that's
film,
the worst
because...
thing about him is like he has.
I'm not defending him.
He's not. No, I know, but I'm just saying. Like, I totally agree that like he's got this sort of really in-depth nerdy knowledge that people at the time wouldn't have. But he's so fucking unlikable. He's such a tool, and like the kind of implication is that people that like comic books are that kind of horrible, nerdy idiot, like dickhead, that are like referencing the things they like to make everyone else sort of feel bad about themselves.
And he's just so angry. Like, why is he so angry through the whole thing? He's angry about changes to the mall. Why does he give a shit about the mall? Why he's so angry when he's like the bit where he's shouting at Shannon Doherty in the lift before he basically jumps on her.
Jesus Christ!
What the hell gives it the cover, boy?
None of your damn business, but he'll probably kick your ass if he knows what you just pulled.
Are you insane? The guy looks like a date rapist! Is that my jacket?
Brody, start the elevator.
No, not until you tell me what the situation is with you and the sperminator out there. How long has this been going on?
Since I finally mustered the good sense to send you packing. He's a much more suitable companion than you any day.
Are you nuts? The guy's pure testosterone. He's a walking hard-on just looking for a hole.
I'm in need of testosterone after a year of babysitting you and your comic book collection. I forgot what real men were like.
I can't believe you had the nerve to come to my mall and pick up guys.
Oh, no. Shannon did the picking up.
It's just horrible. It makes you feel really icky. And yeah, it's played out as like a really grand romantic kind of, really like, triumphant moment.
But I mean, both the guys are losers and kind of lost their girlfriends because they're crap. Basically,
yeah, but then
win them back by being crap.
By being crap, yeah. Thank you, Joking. Yeah.
So I just building on that point that Matt was making about the comic book side of things. One thing that really stuck home with me was the Star Wars references. That to me now they feel really sort of just lazy, and everyone knows that Star Wars is embedded in popular culture, right? At the time, and I remember this, like it kind of took me back to that time that Christopher was talking about. That was like Star Wars was still very much counterculture, I think. So I don't know, it kind of just like. Yeah, it kind of worked then, but now it just doesn't. It's just lazy.
Yeah,
so
it feels really basic.
Yeah, like it's aged, but in a different way to like, like if you go and watch like She's All That, right? That's like so 90s and so embedded in the 90s. But this feels like it's. I don't know, like its references have aged in a different way to.
I mean, it is still aggressively 90s, though. I mean, there is 90s all over this. It is hard 90s. You could if you wanted to show someone a cultural artifact that like
to be described as aggressively 90s, wouldn't you? Yeah. Cornrows and a hypercolour t-shirt.
None of the references or anything like that does age it, but like that none of that's like offensive, or I don't think it really like maybe to you guys that saw it at the time it like has a more feeling of the film or creates the film in your mind in a certain way. But like the problem with me is that it's just so unlikable. Like he's take it in any context you like, he's absolutely unlikable. And like Joe says, like they lose their girlfriends because they're dicks, and they gain them back by being dicks, and like none of it's redeemable. Like whether that's set now or then, take all the references you like out of it. The plot is Dick is a dick, loses his girlfriend, behaves like a dick, gets his girlfriend back for no apparent reason.
The scene in the lift with Jason Lee and Sharon Doherty, because that's when on this second watching where I just lost it, because it is like you've said to two 14-year-olds have an argument like adults, but they've got no frame of reference for what adults argue about, so they just have an argument about comic books and video games. And then have sex, and I was like, and it's so obviously a set as well, which kind of brought me entirely out of it, because to that point I wasn't exactly buying the whole situation, but that's when I finally thought, oh god, this is actually quite terrible.
Clerks is like all about the script and the dialogue, and it's like there's maybe 3 camera angles in that whole movie and this kind of thing, right? And so I don't know, it's like all of Kevin Smith's stuff is obviously super scripted, and the dialogue's really written very carefully, and it feels like he's sort of like the strong point of Clerks is that, like, it's not really a movie about anything. A couple of guys hang out and stuff happens around them, and this is like Mallrats is like the same thing, but it's like it's been forced to have a plot.
So on that, I read I was reading a Roger Ebert. Are we going to say it like that? We're going to say it like that. Roger Ebert review. And I'm not actually that familiar with Clerks, whatever. Just to be clear, but he was saying that he finished his review and he says the year that Clerks played at Cannes, I was the chairman of the panel discussion of independent filmmakers. Most of them talked about their battles to stay free from Hollywood's play-safe strategies, but Kevin Smith cheerfully said he'd happily do whatever the studios wanted if they'd pay him for his films. And he said at the time, I thought he was joking, which I think is kind of like, it does feel a bit like Clerks has just been pressed through the sieve of a studio. And they've said, but you need to have a plot and you need to have this. And it's come out just this horrible mesh of the two. That doesn't really work.
Suppose it is like, if it's it's the first time he's been given a big bunch of cash, right? So maybe he's trying to be, a good boy, and so they won't take it away from him. But the two things don't really work.
Then there's a line of dialogue though that Jeremy London says, and it's when they're coming back from the crappier mall after they've had that scene with the fortune teller with the 3 nipples, and he says something like, exactly. Oh my god, that's a whole other discussion. But he said he can't touch us once the cameras start rolling or something, because he'll lose the face towards the network execs. And I thought, oh my god, is this Kevin Smith realizing that he's just got to keep going with this thing to please the execs? I thought that was some kind of like meta humor in there, but I thought that kind of summed up the whole experience for me, that the camera's just got to keep rolling and they're going to hope that there's something at the end of it.
I wish I could put it into a context of like later films though, because like, again, going back to Chasing Amy or Dogma, like how does it compare to either of those films? I haven't seen those for like quite some time. But have any of you watched any of his later films?
He got a lot of plaudits for Chasing Amy, right?
It entered the Criterion Collection.
Well, there you go. I mean, it's... but, maybe, I don't know, is it a progression of him being allowed to do more of what he wanted? I don't know. But this just feels like, like it's got the one traditional boy wins girl plot, and then it's got all this random stuff about Star Wars wedged in on top of it, basically. Yeah. Because, I mean, he's not an auteur in the sense of, a distinctive visual style.
Yeah, I mean, auteur means that he has complete creative freedom, but the trouble is with Kevin Smith is I don't think he's got any creativity beyond putting some fruity dialogue in people's mouths. Like, that's it. And, that's probably why he's a much more competent and prolific podcaster than he is a successful filmmaker.
Jumping off the language thing, the R-bomb My goodness, like I
Oh,
have
yeah.
not heard that word for ages
I
in
agree.
civilized company, and
I'll
it's thrown around like any other word.
The one with the R-bomb for each other. I was like, that's barely a sentence. Like, let alone being horribly, just horrible. Really unpleasant.
But it's like every other word in some scenes. I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa! I forgot this word had power. Like,
I was just going to say that whole storyline of the 15-year-old girl doing research into men's sexual preferences, and then that ending up being how the sting that gets Ben Affleck's character. It just feels like that's an example of Kevin Smith having an idea that he wants to build a whole kind of narrative around, and it's a bit of a shit idea. It's kind of underpinned with being a bit sleazy and a bit fucked up, and yet he seems to have built the entire film around it. And there seems to be quite a few examples of that. It's just so poor.
Yeah, I think he uses sleazy and fucked up as a crutch. Those are like his. It's funny because it's sleazy. It's funny because it's fucked up, rather than actually writing jokes or any kind of semblance of a plot. I mean, Clerks is plotless, but at least it works as a comedy, and this does neither.
I think I've always had that thing. I think we've talked about it before, Christopher and Joker, but like The Simpsons versus Family Guy, whereas like it's a lot harder to be funnier at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. or wherever The Simpsons watch than it is to be just like really inappropriate, like the kind of humor that Family Guy goes for, if you know what I mean. And I feel like Kevin Smith has sort of leaned on this kind of like, oh, when I'm out there, it's inappropriate, but it's not good writing at all. It's just like leaning on the fact that it's a bit outrageous, but it's just aged really badly.
Well, if we've learnt nothing from South Park, which blended the two perfectly, it's that Family Guy is written by manatees in a bull pit.
That sums up Kevin Smith quite nicely in the 90s.
Yeah. All right. Does anyone have any final thoughts that they would like to get off their chest?
I feel like we've kind of piled in hard on it, but if you take it away from like it is a film and a commodity. If you take it away as kind of like a cultural artifact, not to give it so much grandeur, but the mall is a really important part of American mythology, and it is where the teenagers go to hang out when they're depressed or when they got nothing to do, and I'm sure that maybe Jean Baudrillard has said something about the Clerks and potentially even Mallrats, and I think it's an interesting kind of way of looking at American culture if you really wanted to make it sound good.
I think you're giving it far more credit than it is. But I did, part of this podcast, I did say, please try and find one redeemable thing. So, Teddy, I'm impressed.
If I was say one redeemable thing, I enjoyed the really pathetic subplot of the guy that couldn't see the magic eye.
Yeah.
I thought that was fine. Really, overall, really inoffensive, which was my favourite thing about it. And Stan Lee came across as really likeable, which I think he probably was.
Yeah, I can relate. There was a time when it was all about comics for me. I had a girl probably the same as yours. She always complained that I spent too much time with my own comics, and eventually we broke up.
See, what did she know? Here you are now, a legend in the field. Probably had a slew of women since her, am I right?
Oh, lots of women. Jagger and me, we had a running contest to see who had the most. Matter of fact, last time I looked, I was way ahead.
Damn, that's hot!
But I never forgot that girl.
Well, did you ever get back together with her?
One day I found out she got married. I had blown it. I had missed my window.
That leads into my redeemable thing about it, which is that if it wasn't for Mallrats, there wouldn't be the really good, satisfying Stan Lee cameo in Captain Marvel, which is actually a really lovely moment and maybe my favourite Stan Lee cameo in any MCU film.
Yeah, so Mallrats is part of the MCU.
Yeah.
Or...
No.
Yeah.
Oh
God, yeah.
No, it's not. No, he's on his way.
No. The making of Mallrats is part of the MCU.
That's exactly right, yes.
I don't know. My only thought was, just in the context that we're recording this in, is that people aren't going to shopping centres or malls at the moment, and they increasingly probably won't. Like, it'll be online shopping. So the whole premise of this is going to die in the past, and the whole idea of Mallrats might die and be forgotten about. People look back at that movie and go, "What the fuck is that?"
Okay, right. Let's wrap this up. I think we all can all agree that this should be left in the past and never resurrected again. Do you want to give a score out of 10?
1 minus -1 billion.
Anyone want to give it 1 billion to bring it back up to 0?
What's the kind of scale? What's the yardstick for this so far? Because I mean, this is the first one, so what are we judging it on? And
I think, well, this will be the benchmark, won't it? I mean, I guess
this will be the benchmark. Okay.
I guess if we so we're talking about films. The premise of this podcast is that these are films that you've grown out of. Okay, these are films that you liked for a brief period of time that you've now grown out of. So I guess the scale is 1. Yes, you're absolutely right. You should be ashamed of liking this. It should never be brought up again, and you should wear it as a badge of disgrace around your neck for the rest of your life. To 10, what are you talking about? It's as good as Godfather 2. So there you go.
It's better than some bits of Godfather 3. I'll say that for
fair.
I'm just going to weigh in literally 1 to 0. I feel like I'm the least that was ever going to be impressed by this movie, having not seen Clark's recently enough to care, and I really hated it. Everything about it. Sorry, I feel horrible about it, but 1, 0, -1 billion.
I'm going to say I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. I'm not sure why it's not a 1, but it just feels it's so awful. But as a 15-year-old, I kind of liked it. It's kind of weird. Like, I completely empathise with Christopher on this one. Like, it's reprehensible now, and that's a terrible thing to think about what our views were, or a complete lack of thoughtlessness at the age of 15, 16. But yeah, we actually watched it.
That's where I come from, I think. But I also feel like I sort of went through that same journey, and at the end, I realised that I'm actually quite relieved that I am embarrassed by it, and that I don't still like it, which is hopefully for the best. Matt,
I'm gonna give it a 4, which is generous.
Very generous.
Because when you watch it again now, there is a lot to dislike. I think, you have to be in the mindset, like you say, of a teenage boy who, all of the things that you like, all of the comic books you read and all that kind of thing, the whole world looks down on you for, and it's very counterculture and out there. And at the time, it was good to have films coming out that, that celebrated some of that in some ways and had characters that enjoyed those things. But for the actual content of the movie, I think it's got to be a -2. So what's that even out as? 1. There we go.
Yeah, nice.
Split the difference.
Ted, have you scored?
No, because I'm struggling with this one, because I know that Kevin Smith is kind of heralded as the king of nerddom, but I've never really liked what he does. So this to me was just kind of it was a bit of a, well, that's what he does film, and I can see all of the points that we've made and why it potentially isn't very good now. But I take what everyone says on board previous to it. If I was 15 when this came out, I love it, and I think it was the best thing ever, and I couldn't wait to watch it again, I can imagine. but now obviously watching it, I'm a bit like, it's not even a good film. So all of the bad things I don't really get emotional about. But I'll give it a 2.
Wow. Okay. So I'm going to give it a 1. So by my calculation, that's minus $1 billion plus about 6. So I'll let someone else do the maths on that.
I hate to go over your thing, but I forgot the secret thing about me. 30-something-year-old lesbian is that I do have a little bit of a thing for Ben Affleck, and I'm okay with it. My boyfriend should know. We enter into the spirit of honesty with this podcast. I do fancy him a little bit, and I always did, and it probably was off the back of Armageddon, which, because I'm a bit younger than you, was probably the Mallrats of my generation. I don't know. And I think the worst thing about Mallrats is it really made me hate Ben Affleck.
No.
And I just really wanted to tell you all about that. I thought
That's
you'd
fine.
want to know.
It's a good admission, and we really appreciate your honesty.
Yeah.
I wrote 3 notes about this film, and one of them was, the last one I wrote was, how the hell did Ben Affleck have a career after this?
Exactly.
Because everyone else in the film
really
who you think that about didn't have a career after that film. You've not heard of many of those people. But yet Ben Affleck somehow shone in his role
surviving.
in order to draw this closed. And once again, thank you very much for enduring Mallrats with me. I owe you all £2.50 YouTube rental fee. The only thing left to do is to pick the film that we're watching next, and I believe Matt Owen will be the host of next week's episode. So Matt, would you like to reveal to the group the film that we'll be watching?
I would, or maybe I wouldn't. My film is a comedy that I loved as a child. It's from 1984, which is a good year for comedy. Ghostbusters. This is Spinal Tap. It's Police Academy.
Oh. Wow. Brilliant. All right. Guys.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Matt. Police Academy 1, just to reiterate, not Police Academy 7.
Police Academy 1.
Mission to
all
Moscow.
of them.
Not Mission Miami Beach. Yeah.
If there are any really good director's cuts around.
Yeah, the Criterion edition is well worth seeking out, I'm sure.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to Katherine, and again, apologies to Katherine. Thank you to Teddy. Thank you to Matt, and thank you to Joachim. This has been the Methods Unsound podcast. We'll be back next week, where Matt Owen will discuss why he loved Police Academy so much and what he thinks about it now. Good night.